My name is Edgar Mannheimer, and this is Kalam, a podcast about the Middle East.
When you are planning for an exhibition, you don't put like a plan if more artists got killed in your exhibition, in your show. It's going to be an exceptional thing. But in this case, we have to plan for it. We have to plan for what if, like we have plans ready in the drawers if the Israeli army decided to raid the museum. Like each one of the staff knows exactly what his role is going to be immediately. Who's going to take care of the collection, who's going to smuggle what, who's going to try to shut the doors. Like you don't have to think about this in other contexts, but here it's like 101.
The voice you just heard belongs to Amer Shomali, a visual artist and the general director of the Palestinian Museum. In the clip you just heard, Amer is speaking about the exceptional nature of running a museum during the genocide in Gaza and under the occupation of the West Bank. Amer was appointed to the position on October 5th, 2023, just 2 days after the attack by Hamas that changed everything. Before his time at the museum, Amer made a documentary about the curious case of the Israeli army chasing down a wanted number of cows that allegedly threatened its security. More on Amer Shomali and running a museum during a war in just a minute. But first, a reminder. Kalam Podcast is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy listening to Kalam, please subscribe to the show in whatever podcast application you're listening to right now. And please give us a rating. It helps other people find out about us. And if you'd like to support the show with a small donation, consider signing up to Kalam Podcast on Patreon for just $3 a month. In addition to supporting the show, you'll gain access to lots of great bonus content. Go to patreon.com and search for Kalam Podcast, or go straight to patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. That's patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. Now, on to the show.
Early 1988, a Bayt Sahur cow truck drove to an Israeli kibbutz. An Israeli peacenik there agreed to sell my town the cows. There was Rivka, Ruth, Lola, and then there was Goldie.
We are Palestinians. We deserve to have a home. We deserve to have our land. We deserve to have our freedom.
This is from the 2014 documentary The Wanted 18, directed by today's guest, Amer Shomali. It tells a fantastically absurd tale, a true story that took place during the first Intifada, when the small Palestinian town of Bayt Sahur acquired 18 cows from well-wishing kibbutz Israelis. At the time, Palestinians had no other option than to buy their milk from large Israeli dairy producers. So, as a part of the economic resistance during the first Intifada, the residents of Bayt Sahur decided to acquire cows in order to produce their own dairy products. When the Israelis found out about this, they labeled the cows as wanted and began deploying the military to search for them. The cows were moved from home to home in order to evade the Israelis as if they were contraband. Amer Shomali tells this story in part in the traditional documentary style, but for the story to really come alive, he adds a unique and honestly hilarious element. The cows themselves come alive through stop-motion animation. In between interviews with people who are involved with the story, we see the cows, as imagined by Amer, talk about their predicament. Remember, the cows were given to the Palestinian town by sympathetic Israelis, so the cows are imagined as Israeli. But in the documentary, they speak Arabic, adding to the amusing confusion. The cows have different personalities, representing different opinions in Israeli society. One is a diehard Zionist, one is a peacenik idealist, one simply wants to get her nails done, and so on. I won't spoil the ending, but the idea is that the Israeli cows have to put up with being smuggled from house to house on rickety pickup trucks in the middle of the rain to evade the Israelis who are hunting them. All the hardships they endure on the way show them what it's like to be Palestinian, something that these Israeli cows had never really thought about before. You really, really should watch this documentary if you can. Anyway, I met Amer at his office at the Palestinian Museum in Bayt, north of Ramallah on the occupied West Bank. That is the same Bayt as the university. The museum is right next to it, and that will be sort of important to our discussion. Over the course of our conversation, we touch on the documentary I just mentioned, running a museum during a war, Amer's upbringing in Syria, the disillusionment he felt when he first saw Palestine as a teenager, Western romanticization of Palestine, and PLO children's books. So, without further ado, here's Amer Shomali.
So my name is Amer Shomali. I'm an artist and a filmmaker. I did previously one film called The Wanted 18, animated documentary. And I used to teach at the university here in the Faculty of Art.
What did you teach?
I was the head of the design department, teaching the foundation level for design students.
Okay.
Then I got this job, the head of the museum. I was announced as the new director of the museum on October the 5th. October the 6th, it was a holiday. October the 7th was October the 7th, and it was a holiday. And I entered my office on October the 8th, trying to figure out what to do during this current situation.
Yeah.
Because previously I had a lot of questions about what is the role of the museum in the colonial context. But October the 7th made it, and afterward made it very intense and urgent to answer what is the role of a museum in a colonial context. And they started to brainstorm with the team on what can you do, how can you turn a museum, which is usually a very static and aesthetic thing, into an institution on the front line. How can you be a leading force in the liberation movement as a museum? So we started to experiment with many things. At the beginning, we started to do exhibitions outside of Palestine, in Dubai, in Beirut, in London, trying to create safe spaces, because early in late October and early November, it was still not easy to be on the Palestinian side. So we used the Palestinian Museum and Art and Culture as an excuse to create safe spaces around the world to show solidarity with Palestinians. So we create an exhibition in Dubai. People will come to the exhibition wearing kufiyas and robes to show solidarity with Palestine. Meanwhile, it was not easy at that time to say, you know what, I'm with the Palestinians. So we created those 5 exhibitions around the world. Then the situation in the West Bank started to get a little bit looser, or we got used to it. So we opened this big exhibition inside the museum.
The one that's called This Is Not an Exhibition.
Which is, it's called This Is Not an Exhibition. Basically, we called our partners in Gaza, my friends in Gaza, Shayabik and Al Art Galleries, and both of their spaces were bombed early in the war. So we offered our main exhibition space as an extension to their spaces, their bombed spaces in Gaza. And they started to curate the space. So they send us sketches on how they want the space to look like. And they spread the word around the artists in Gaza that we are making an exhibition in Ramallah. And shipping was impossible to get anything out of Gaza at that time, and still. So basically, we started to get messages from the artists saying, "Hi, my name is Ibrahim Qouta. I have an artwork in Bethlehem with George Al-Ama. Hi, my name is Sharif Sarhan. I have an artwork in Nablus with Abdullah." So we started to go from door to door across Palestine, historical Palestine.
Artwork that was already there, that they had already sent.
Okay. It's an artwork by Gazan artist. It's already in the West Bank for different reasons. Sometimes somebody bought it and it's in the living room. Sometimes it was too heavy to take back to Gaza. Maybe sometimes it's too big to go through the X-ray machine. So we started to gather those from all over the West Bank to create this exhibition.
So this is mainly art from Gaza?
Only art from Gaza.
Okay.
Only art from Gaza, and some of the artworks inside are the only surviving examples of the artists, because sometimes the artists, their studios get bombed in Gaza and they lost all of their work, and by accident some of their work were abroad, and those are some of the examples. When we opened the exhibition on February, only one artist among the 100 artists was killed by the Israelis. Now, 4 months after, we have 5 artists, and another 4 artists were killed. Meanwhile, the exhibition is running.
So, of these paintings,
5
of the artists,
five of the artists have been killed during this past 3-4 months. And the interesting thing that many people, when they heard about the exhibition, they started to come to the museum carrying paintings, saying, we heard about this exhibition and we want to add this painting. So we kept adding new names of new artists and new lenders, and we'll make space and we'll put a new artwork. So it's kind of an alive exhibition, a protest space where people will come and change something in the museum, which is not common at all. And we don't have an end date for the exhibition, so it's going as long as the genocide is going. And when we try to register it on the database of exhibitions internationally, they said this is not an exhibition, because you don't have a final list of who's in it, you don't have an end date of it, you don't have final participant artists. So this is not an exhibition. And for me, this was like an inspiring, that this is not an exhibition. This was not the moment for celebrating art for the sake of art. It's a protest space. Rather, it's a space for protesting rather than an exhibition for enjoying art. So that was the story of the exhibition inside. The overall, I think the museum, for me, was always a fascinating concept in Palestine, because this is the new museum. Our old National Museum was in Jerusalem, and it was confiscated and looted in 1967 when they occupied Eastern Jerusalem. They took over our museum, including all the exhibits inside it. And it took us years as Palestinians to decide to build a new museum till we get that old museum back. So this is not the National Museum, but it's acting as if it is because of the current situation. And the question is, like, what makes the Palestinian Museum unique? I think the 2 aspects that in a colonial context, 80% of our audience can't reach the museum physically. I'm talking about all the refugees around the world, in Lebanon, Syria, in the diaspora, and Gaza, in addition to daily checkpoints across the West Bank. So 80% of your audience can't reach the museum, and 80% of the national collection, which you need to tell the Palestinian story, are looted by the Israelis long time ago, and it's in their storages, whether the army or the National Library or the Hebrew University. So basically, those 2 aspects make it very different than any other museum around the world. 80% of the audience, 80% of the collection. How to tell the story using nothing for the people who can't be in the museum. And this is the main challenge. So
how do you face that challenge?
Now we're trying to a different new approach to do the exhibitions. I'm introducing a new kind of technique that we have 4 curators working on the exhibition at the same time. A curator for archives and research, who's kind of the lead curator, but putting the backbone of the exhibition, doing the research, pulling the documents from the archives, and writing the academic text. And then there is an equal important curator who's the art and ethnography curator, who's going to put all the objects related to that story. Then the 3rd curator, who's the oral history curator, who's responsible to fill the gaps of things that does not exist either in the archives or as an object. So it's oral history to document the gaps of the physical existence of the story. And the 4th curator is going to be responsible of conveying the same content, but digitally for those who can't reach the museum abroad. So for each exhibition, we have 4 curators working as, again, equally important to create 4 layers of the same content, telling the story 4 times in different ways for different audience and targets. For us, it's something new. And each museum has its own kind of technique. Like the common practice in museums, like the British Museum, for example, they have the Egyptian department and they have curators. The Greek department, they have their own curator. And each one of them, they will go inside the museum and put their own layer. But when we start to think about what sources of knowledge we have as Palestinians, we thought of those 4 sources: the diaspora, the oral history, the archives, and the objects.
Yeah. So, just out of curiosity, where in Jerusalem is or was the building of the National?
It is still functioning. It's called the Rockefeller Museum now, and it used to be called the Palestine Archaeological Museum. But they carved a new name on it, and even the exhibition, who was curated by a Palestinian curator back then, it's still on display. They added caption in Hebrew and they carved a new name on it. And
Okay, so it's in Western Jerusalem?
Eastern Jerusalem.
It's in Eastern Jerusalem. Okay.
Now it's called the Rockefeller Museum.
Okay. Amer now shows me some of the children's magazines that the PLO printed in the 70s and 80s. Essentially comic strips where Palestinians and other Arabs are heroes, teaching kids about Arab liberation struggles. One of them is about the town Bayt Sahur, where Amer comes from, and where the drama with the 18 cows takes place. Yeah, I'd be so interested to see.
Then this is not one of the book, but this is a bad example of the same good intention.
A bad example of a good intention?
Yeah. And the visuals are not good, but it's an interesting. This is for example a story about Bayt Sahur also.
Yeah.
So you see some of the visuals and the images and telling the story of Bayt Sahur. This is also another.
So this is a children's book that was published by the PLO.
Yeah, this one from the stories from the Intifada.
Yeah.
Superhero stories for kids. حكايات بطولية للأطفال in Bayt Sahur. And the publisher Dar Kind, the Nashar Tawzi'. This is in Jordan. So this is something about Qassam, basically in 1936. This is قافلة الشهداء. I don't know what is that. Ars الروح. So all of those are kind of patriotic stories about superheroes. Asad over Yafa, Haifa, about Algeria. Also, they were trying to connect the Arabs with this is a better example of kind of similar to. So this is kind of backstories about what happened in Palestine.
Yeah, wow.
Why it happened. And it's that because here, for example, this is a short story about the original native people of North America.
Yeah.
So they start to put you in a context, so you start to understand that this is colonialism, Palestine, North America.
Connecting to other struggles.
Yeah. It's about Egypt.
Wow.
Gandhi.
Wow.
And those were top illustrators, top novelists working with the PLO on this project.
And were these published during the Intifada?
During the Intifada. Even before, like they started to publish those, I think, late 70s.
Okay. Wow.
Late 70s. And their main focus was to create a collective memory and national identity across the world.
In Sweden, of course, there's lots of parts of the world. It's not easy to be a culture worker, and we complain about lack of funds and, finances and at times lack of interest. Like, how do we reach out to people? But obviously here the situation is like, you're functioning under an occupation, which is extremely hostile, especially to culture and expressions of identity and stuff, and then especially after 7th of October. So how is it? Because I want to get to your film and you yourself as well. But like, how is it to be a culture worker in occupied Palestine?
It is super complicated. Like, we have to think of details that I don't see how you have to think about it in any other context. Like, in the design of the exhibition, if you notice, like, we printed each name separately of the artists participating. It's not a full list, it's separately, because we know that we might be able to add new names, but also if somebody got killed, we just need to change something in the detail without having to reprint the whole thing. When you are applying for an exhibition, you don't put like a plan if more artists got killed in your exhibition, in your show. It's gonna be an exceptional thing. But in this case, we have to plan for it. We have to plan for what if, like we have plans ready in the drawers if the Israeli army decided to raid the museum. Like each one of the staff knows exactly what his role is gonna be immediately. Who's gonna take care of the collection, who's gonna smuggle what, who's gonna try to shut the doors. Like you don't have to think about this in other contexts, but here it's like 101, what to do and how to do it if they decide to raid the museum.
Does the Israeli state sort of communicate with you, with the museum?
No. Nothing, but they came to arrest students from the university next door through the museum twice. So one time they got through the parking, one time they got through the garden to arrest students next door. And the past 7 years since the museum opened, I think the Israelis got inside the museum, through the museum, to get to Bayt, I think 2 or 3 times. 3 times. 2 times in the last 6 months, I think another 2 times before that. And in the past 7 months, one of our colleagues in the museums got killed by the Israelis. Every month we have 1 or 2 who got arrested from the staff itself. Like you are asking for someone, like, where is he today, and he's arrested. So it's part of the like daily operations that one of your staff members might be absent because he got arrested, which is kind of getting more and more common.
How is the museum financed?
We have core funding from Ta'awun Welfare Association, but it's not it's part of the budget. The rest are covered by individual Palestinian donors and some international partnership. Also, we have a core funding from Bank of Palestine, but lately we are struggling because all the Palestinians and the Arabs, the individuals, their main focus is rebuilding Gaza now. So that will be their top priority. And foreigners are kind of, I say maybe blackmailing the Palestinians. Many of them, they don't want anything to do with Palestinians, but the others, they see it as a good moment to blackmail and compromise the Palestinian narrative.
Okay.
So we have partners who are offering a lot of money to get involved in our projects in conditions, like conditional funding, saying, yeah, but we know that you have a huge archive. We need you to not publish the collection of Abu Jihad, for example, Rassai Kanafani. You can't use this terminology when you are describing this current situation. So they try to change and manipulate the narrative and our terminology in exchange for sustainable funding, which is not acceptable, and that's a cautious decision, which we have to pay a price for it. I don't know how, but for the constitution, which is understood, like what happened in Gaza is huge, so it's understood that almost all the funding will be going toward saving the people of Gaza and rebuilding Gaza.
And you yourself, you grew up in Yarmouk?
I grew up in Yarmouk, and we managed to come back to Palestine when I was 17 years old.
How did you manage to do that?
It's a long story, but my father left Palestine after 1967, so he had his ID, but he got involved with the PLO, and so he never came back. After the peace process, he felt that it might be safe, so he came back and he applied for the family reunion, and we got it. So we came back.
Okay. So I've watched your film, The Wanted 18. Really incredible film. I just want to know how you came up with the idea. You said that you as a child in Yarmouk, you like heard about this crazy story about the cows. You were reading a children's book about it.
Yeah, the PLO back then they had an super interesting project called Dar al-Fata al-Arabi. They supported as PLO, and the rich Palestinians funded it, which is basically a children publication house, and its main focus was to create books and publications in all the available languages, same content but different languages, to visualize Palestine for the Palestinians in the diaspora. So at the same time I was reading the book, another refugee in Sweden was reading the book but in Swedish, and somebody else in Germany will be reading the same book in German. So they wanted to create this collective memory and identity across the world. So one of the books had the comic story about the cows in Bayt Sahur. Part of it was the cows, but it was mainly about the civil disobedience movement in Bayt Sahur. And for me, it was inspiring. Like I was a big fan of all the superheroes, Batman, but all of a sudden I see a comic book about superheroes from my hometown. It was inspiring for me. And years passed by till we came back to Palestine, and which I didn't like at the beginning.
Why?
Because I felt that it's totally different than the fantasy world I had.
When you came back?
When I came back in 1997, it was totally different. Like it was.
And where did you settle?
In Bayt Sahur.
Okay.
In Bayt Sahur. So I didn't like it. I even ran back to Damascus a year later, and my family chased me back from Syria.
Really? When you were like 17?
Yeah. Yeah. And I tried to go back to Syria to study there. Like I don't want to stay in Palestine, which is very weird for a refugee. but at one moment I met one of the characters we ended up interviewing in the film, and he told me like, whatever you imagined about Palestine was true, but you missed that moment.
Yeah.
And for me, creating this film was a way to relive those moments that I had to miss, and to reconciliate with the fantasy world I had as a child. So by interviewing those people over 4 years, taking their stories, making it into drama and animating those into details, gave me the chance to come into peace with that part of my childhood.
So the moment that you missed that the person in Bayt Sahur told you was, I guess, late 70s, early 80s, the Intifada times. And then you arrived in 1997. And so what was it that you were disappointed by?
When I grew up in Damascus, we always thought of Palestine as the utopian place where everyone is dedicated for the patriotic cause, and everyone is obsessed with Palestine, rebuilding Palestine, volunteering, like the word I'm reading about in those comic books. But when I came back, I saw it as a normal place. Like kids in my generation are into cars, new phones, fashion, which is normal.
Yeah.
But I never thought of Palestinians that they are gonna be normal.
Yeah.
Inshallah. It was my problem. It was all of this propaganda I've been fed it for years. That made me not accepting Palestinians to be normal.
Sure. I think a lot of people have that experience coming to Palestine, even people from the West that sort of follow the Palestinian struggle, and they're empathetic, and maybe they're activists and or just interested. I remember I had that experience when I came, because my mom is a journalist, so I grew up in the Middle East because of that, and I always heard about Palestine, and I was like engaged in it, and I was living in Jordan, and all my friends are Palestinian. And then my mom took me on a trip to see Jerusalem. And I had this weird wake-up moment when I was walking through the old city, and I saw Palestinian vendors selling, the like I love the IDF T-shirts and stuff like that. And I just got kind of shocked.
Yeah, it's shocking, and I think this is gonna happen at sometime in the coming 10-20 years again with the generation who stood up with Palestine now, because they portray an image of the Palestinian who's the victim, or the hero, or but when they come to Ramadan, they see that we have a nightlife, you can have a gin and tonic, and So it doesn't mean that we're not those people, but when we have the moment to live normally, we will live.
Yeah, I think this is a common theme in the West and in the diaspora, in the second, third generation of Palestinians, and also just Arabs in general, or anyone who's supportive of the Palestinian cause. There's this romanticism, I guess, and people are truly, even, like white people who are not Muslim are shocked that that people drink beer in Palestine or something.
Yes.
What do you think about this idea of romanticism and like making Palestine into this like
utopia?
Yeah.
But it's understood that it's easier to sell Palestine when you have that kind of image of it. But honestly, personally, and as a museum, we are not interested in delusions. We are more interested in creating also the collective identity of Palestinians and the collective image of the Palestinians. So one day when we have the chance as Palestinians to come back to Palestine, that we all will be speaking the same language, the same terminology, we have the same agreement on who are the Palestinians. So for example, one of our main projects are the Palestinian archives. Our archives were looted in 1948, 1997, 1982, 2001. But this time we are creating the digital archives, so there's nothing to loot.
Yeah.
Now we have 300,000 documents, and we are still documenting things about Palestine, like old photos, old documents, videos, posters, whatever else we can have access to, we just document it. So in a way or another, we are trying to create a source for people around the world to see who are the Palestinians using facts rather than emotional manipulation.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
I had something like this experience when I went to Cuba, for example.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you have kind of the same shock when you go to Cuba. Think you're like you're gonna meet Che Guevara walking in the streets with Fidel Castro's, and you feel that okay, they have good restaurants, they have like 5-star hotel. The Americans are back into their 5-star hotel, and you are servicing them. So it's like it's the lack of information and the misleading informations who will push us toward this romanticism. And I think having a normal life or wanting to have a normal life don't make us less of deserving a better life.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, this is kind of what I'm trying to do with the podcast. I mean, it's obviously countering the Zionist narrative, but it's also telling the story of like just normal stuff, So I try to be a little bit provocative as well in my channels, being like, look, I'm drinking Palestinian beer.
Yeah, for example, when you show images of rock Palestinian bands back in the 70s here in Palestine, many people are like, what? Can you have electric guitar with a long hair?
Yeah.
And rock songs in Arabic. It's
and people are surprised.
Yeah, Palestinians are surprised.
Yeah.
Palestinians, you show it to the younger generation, they say, this is Palestine.
Yeah.
They created, and this is very dangerous. Like, at some point you might be fighting next to the other fellow Palestinian, but you are not aiming for the same Palestine. Exactly. You are thinking of different Palestine.
Yeah.
It's just dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, this has happened so many times and so many revolutions and, colonial struggles in Iran, for example.
Yeah. So when you finish from the colonial, you turn back to your fellow Palestinians, and the first argument about what kind of a country we'll have, you start civil war.
Yeah. It's normal. And I think and this is obviously like a typical Zionist argument, like, oh, well, Palestinians are better under Israel anyway, because look, the Arabs are only fighting. Which just seems to me like a ridiculous argument, because like, yeah, okay, well, maybe Palestinians want to have a shit country, but let them have it. I mean, it's their rights.
Yeah.
So in your film, how did you get the idea of making like the stop motion? What's it called?
Yeah,
stop motion cows.
Yeah.
And having them be like Israeli cows speaking in Arabic.
My background was at that time I was an animator, and I do political cartoons and comics for newspapers. So for me, that kind of setup is well justified. Like, this is a good entry point to tell the story of of Bayt Sahur and Pakistan. But during my studies in England and in Canada, I always thought that, and I always felt that maybe in the West, it's easier for them to sympathize with a cow than to sympathize with a Palestinian. So I decided to give the main voice to the cows. So when you are watching the film, it doesn't matter if you are pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, you are in a safe place because you are pro-cows. So we are watching their point of view, turning from Israeli cows to Palestinian cows, knowing what does it mean to live under occupation in Palestine. And that would be your entry point to sympathize with the Palestinians. So I think that this is an interesting twist and a safe way to get the audience involved.
Yeah, it's a brilliant. And I mean, also just technically how you can go from like footage from today and like typical documentary interviews, and then the like live action, like the live action cows, like where you kind of you film as if it's an
animation.
And animation.
Yeah, it's a total mess. On paper, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
On paper, it's scripted, it didn't make any sense.
If I had read it, I would think it would be crazy. But somehow seamlessly,
many people turned this project down because they felt that it's gonna be a visual mess.
Yeah.
And I agree with them. Like it could. It wasn't an easy call, but by trial and error, it eventually worked.
Yeah.
But it was edited also in a weird way. Like I was sitting in the editing room, and we will edit the thing, like one thing after another, and we see that there is a visual jump here. And I go to the studio and I'll do a sketch or a transition, an animation transition or a comic transition. We'll put it in the middle. So we were kind of sewing all the patchwork together, trying to make it as seamless as possible.
Yeah.
I'm working on a new film now.
Okay.
I show it to you.
Yeah, please.
My name is Naji. I'm the one who discovered Moshe Dayan's looted treasure, and I'm the one who stole it back.
This new film is a mockumentary, a historic documentary about an event that never took place. Just like The Wanted 18, the concept is innovative and it has great guest appearances, among them the Israeli journalist Amira Hass, speaking in all seriousness about this historically fake event. Basically, it tells the story of a museum heist where Palestinians use James Bond or like Ocean's 11 style tactics to break into the Rockefeller Museum and take back objects and documents that were looted in 1967.
I'm obsessed with this, filling the gaps of the looted history, how to tell the story of Palestinians to the Palestinians around the world, how to make sure that we stay one people, unified, with the same memories and the same desires for the future. Meanwhile, we are getting born and raised in different places, different contexts, different countries.
Yeah.
Imagining the day of liberating Palestine, when we have the chance to come back, that it's gonna be ever we never aparted. You have sometimes in your life friends that no matter how many years pass by and you don't see each other, the moment you see each other, you continue the last conversation. I think this is gonna be our top priority as Palestinian cultural institutions, to bridge this gap in the narrative and this gap in the timeline in Palestine.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Edgar.
I just have a quick, just a curious question. I mean, I guess I'm not sure about the museum's official position on like cultural boycott with Israel, but I noticed you have some Israelis in your films, like Amira Hass, for example. Yeah. How do you think about this kind of like communication with Israelis? Or
we are part of the BDS, like we are part of PACB, but in the BDS and PACB, I'm an activist in BDS when I was in Kilkit even. I designed their first visuals and their first posters. We don't boycott individuals, and in a documentary context, it's allowed to do interviews with Israelis.
Yeah.
Especially when you are kind of telling the story. So it's
because I think this is a misconception. People, I mean, in the West, I think people think in BDS you just don't. There's no communication with any Israel. Like you can't have like a meeting between a Palestinian academic and Israeli academic.
No, you can if we both agree on the right of return and the BDS guidelines. Like when I finished the film and the film was just submitted to the Oscars, I got an email from Jerusalem Film Festival, and they said that we want your film to be a part of the film festival. You are nominated for the best award in our festival. No screenings before get nominated too. And I responded that I don't want the film to be screened at this festival. I'm for the BDS. And they never responded to that. But later on, I got approached by Zoprot. Also an Israeli hardcore left, very progressive. They have a festival called Nakba, Nakba Film Festival. And they requested the film, and I screened it with them. But I requested to screen it in Yap, in the Arab venue. And Israeli Minister of Culture, Mary Regev, was back then. She lost her mind. She started to slander me in Haaretz, saying that this film is, this filmmaker is lying, this is not true story, and she tried to ban the film from being screened.
The Wanted 18.
The Wanted 18. And with the Israeli Film Festival. And she was blaming me also for not accepting to screen it for the Jerusalem Film Festival. But at the same time, she wanted to ban it from the Israeli Film Festival because...
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, I mean, the whole point of the documentary is showing how, at one point, showing how ridiculous it would be to be scared of cows. And then she's like, I'm doing the same thing. All right. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Can I take a picture of you?
Yes.
That was Amer Shomali and the 23rd episode of Kalam Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. For more information on the podcast itself and updates about Palestine and the Middle East in general, follow us on Instagram at Kalam Podcast and on TikTok at Kalam_podcast. Kalam is written and hosted by me, Edgar Mannheimer. Research and production is by Sam Karl Samre, and sound design is by Arthur Mannheimer.